Okay, so what I'm going to showcase here is a basic measure for a laminate countertop. Some people will call it a Formica top. Formica is a brand, just like Wilson Art, Nevermar, Pionite. Those are all different brands of laminate. But if you're going to measure up this area for a laminate countertop, I'm showing you just some of the basics that you would do. One of the things that you do is you would draw a rectangle on a piece of paper. As you draw that rectangle on the piece of paper, what you would do is you would put little blocks on the end of it. Now this is just something that I choose to do, but those little blocks are where it meets against the wall here and here. They're called scribe blocks. I put 1/4-inch blocks on, so that way if I go to put up a perfectly rectangular top here and it kind of rocks a little because the wall is bellied or bowed in on certain areas, or especially if you had a drywall wall, a lot of times the inside corners are heavily mudded, so the countertop might not sit right, and I don't like cutting out a bunch of drywall and things like that. To be able to make the countertop fit, I like customizing the top so that when you go to do the installation, it goes in as smoothly as possible. So I would put scribe ears on both ends. So that's what I've done on this drawing, okay? Then what I do when I do my drawing is, and I choose to do this, and you can do it whatever way that you want, but I put an X on the ends I know that will be finished. So those will be the ends that will get a laminate edge going all the way down them. Then if I have an outside corner and it's not going to be a square corner, it's not going up against a refrigerator or a range, then I put a radius. So I mark an R for radius, and what I'll usually do is I'll give a little legend on here that will say the R equals radius, the X equals a finished edge, things of that nature. Then I will mark where my splashes are. Now some people will put BS for backsplash, and over here they would say, oh no, that's SS for side splash. I try to keep it as simple as possible and just use the same thing. It still means splash goes here and a splash goes here. So when I go and I get that initial drawing set up, that is a rectangle with 2 scribe ears on it, a radius corner, and 2 finished edges with 2 backsplashes. So I get that drawn up, then I go and I start taking my measurements. So what I do is I measure all the way back to the wall, and I measure to the face of the cabinet. The face of the cabinet is the face frame of the cabinet. It is not the drawer face, the false front, or the doors. Okay, so the face of the cabinet comes right around at 23 15/16, and I go down and I take multiple measurements going down the run to make sure that it's very close. This is within a 1/16 as I measure down. Cabinets are typically, hardwood cabinets are typically 24 inches deep to the face frame. Don't always take that for sure. Always measure the cabinets, always make sure as you go down, don't just automatically assume that that's a 24-inch deep cabinet. But as I take that, I decide what I want my overhang to be on my counter. When I mark down measurements on a print, I do not put cabinet measurements unless I put a CAB indicating cabinet after it. I always take my measurements in inches. I do not take them in feet. So I would not put like 2 feet 1 inch for 25 inches. I would just put 25 inches. And I would always specify the inch mark on there and everything, which is 2 hash marks. That is how I choose to measure, because I like to measure to the inch, to the 16th, rather than to the feet. I find it's easier overall because then people aren't doing the conversion, and they can see that when they're laying out the top. So I would go over here, and the way that I determine what my overhang is when I am looking straight down, I want to make sure that I don't see the top of my cabinet, drawer, or door. So I know that if I take this 1 inch past, which a lot of people like going 1 inch, that's going to give me 25 inches. I like to take it where you have 1.25 inches overhang, so I would take it to 25 1/4. The reason I like doing the 1.25 inch overhang over maybe a traditional 1 inch overhang is my scribe ears are 1/4 of an inch. So if I find that I go and I put this top up because I will include my scribe ears with my overall measurement. So over here, when I do this overall measurement and I do 25 1/4, that will mean when I'm measuring off of that scribe ear that I'm putting there, I will have 25 1/4, not 25 1/2, like I cut the board 25 1/4 and I added a 1/4 inch scribe. No, I will cut the board at 25 and then add my 1/4 inch scribe to give me 25 1/4 overall. I do that so that if I have to take off that scribe ear, I still have a 1 inch overhang on this counter, which means looking down, right? That means I'm not seeing the top of this drawer or door, because some people will say, okay, well, hey, that's only 3/4 of an inch. You know, you're going a little bit more. There's bumpers on here. These bumpers can push these drawers or doors out 3/16 of an inch. So that means that's putting you really close to that 1 inch mark. So you want to make sure that as you're looking down, you cannot see the top of this, that it's even. So I've established that this is real close to 24 inches. I'm going to make the depth of my counter 25 1/4. So I might mark it 25 1/4. And you would put the little hash marks on it to indicate inches. And then now I want to figure out my length. So my length, I will take and I will make sure, and this is a part where if you do not have this filler on here right now, don't hook on to your cabinet and forget about this gap against the wall. So you'll push against the wall and you will measure all the way down and you'll measure to the stile. So going to this outside stile, we are 84 15/16. I'm gonna bump it to 85. We don't need to be that precise for this. This is going to be an open area over here. There's no refrigerator, there's no range, there's nothing. If there was, I would make the countertop to that style. I would not put any overhang beyond this. But since we have this open, I'm going to put the same overhang in 1 1/4, including that scribe ear down there, on there that I have over here. So we have the same overhang off of this style as we will have over here. So I measured pretty close to 85. So then I go and I make my mark at 86 1/4 inches. Then what I do is I come over and I go to my sink base, and this sink base is a standard 36-inch sink base. You can have a 33, you can have a 30, you can even have a 24 for a small bar sink. You can have a 27. Cabinet measurements always come in 3-inch increments, so it's always going to be equally divisible by 3. I will mark the center of my sink base at 18 inches, half of 36. Once I mark that, then I measure to the wall, and I come over here and I get my center line for my sink, which is 19 inches. The sink that I'm going to put in now, I know, will be centered in the sink base, and that center will take it right between the center of these two doors, okay? And it's going to be 19 inches. Now what I do is, I would put 19 inches, I put a CL for center line of the sink, and then I put an arrow pointing to the side that I measured from. And then I would again put a legend on here so that somebody could read this. So if I'm not there to explain it, they understand what my thought process was, because everybody can end up measuring differently. But what I do is I always measure from a fixed area. I will not take my measurement for my center line over here at this end because we're adding 1 1/4 inches. That gives me too much of a variance. If I go and I put a measurement over there and I don't specify that I added the overhang, somebody's not sure, they don't put it in the right area, and this ends up 1 1/4 inches off center, and we don't want that for our sink cutout. Again, this is for a laminate countertop. You will do a lot of similar things with other ones, but as we're measuring for the laminate top, we want to make sure that we have our center line for our sink, we have our scribe ears on here, we know that our outside corner here that has the overhang is going to be a rounded corner so we don't get a hip pointer when somebody walks up to it. And we have it set where we know that we're able to set this in place and not have to do a lot of other work. The splashes that we will put on here, when you're measuring for a backsplash, you have to remember that a laminate top is typically 1 9/16 inches thick. If you're using 3/4 like decking with a 3/4 build up. So some people will call it a build up or a build down. That's for another time when we go over that. But essentially that means that with laminate on there, because laminate is a 1/16 of an inch thick, your countertop is 1 inch and 9/16. For sake of argument, we'll do 1.5 inches. If you were trying to get to a certain point, that is where you would determine your splash height. I'm not trying to get to a major point here. I just don't want it to fall right into my mortar joint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 4-inch backsplash. I prefer a 4 over a 3-inch. 3-inch used to be a standard type height. People do 4 now. Sometimes it's 4 1/4 if you're trying to cover up drywall or some areas from a previous splash. But that would determine that if I went 1.5 inches up and I add a 4-inch backsplash, that would take me 5.5 inches up. I'm still not right into that mortar line, which I don't want to be because that can create a caulking issue if I'm trying to caulk where it meets the wall. And that tells me I'm going to make a 4-inch backsplash. So I marked that on the print, 4-inch backsplashes. Anybody that's reading the print should understand then that when you make this splash over here, it should be capped on the left. You make this splash over here, it should be capped on the right. I would then put my name on here. I put the room that it's going into or any other pertinent information so that when you have that print drawn up, that print could be handed to somebody else. You don't even need to speak to them. They can look at that print and they should have all the information they need to be able to have success in building that countertop.